At first glance, they seem to stand on opposite sides of the path to a good life. On one side, Spinoza, the philosopher of reason, clarity, and logic, who believed that true freedom comes from understanding reality as it is, free from superstition, free from emotional slavery. On the other, Jesus, the teacher of radical love, surrender, and sacrifice, who showed that the highest form of life is one lived for others, even to the point of giving up your own life. Reason versus love. Logic versus faith, self-mastery versus self-giving. It seems like a contradiction, but what if it's not? What if, with wisdom, these two visions could not only coexist, but complete one another? What if together they could light the way to a life of purpose, joy, and deep spiritual strength? Today, I want to show you 5 powerful ways these two paths, the rational clarity of Spinoza and the compassionate surrender of Jesus, can unite into something transformative. Freedom from emotional slavery. Spinoza teaches us to rise above impulsive emotions. Jesus shows us how love, not fear or guilt, can be the force that guides our actions. Together, they point to emotional freedom through higher purpose, living for a greater whole. Spinoza says we are part of a divine, infinite nature. Jesus says we are all children of the same Father. Both teach us to go beyond ego and live as servants of something larger than ourselves, the power of understanding and compassion. Reason helps us understand the causes of suffering. Love helps us respond with empathy. One sharpens our mind, the other opens our heart, and that balance changes everything. Joy through connection, not possession. Spinoza says real joy comes from understanding our place in the universe. Jesus says joy comes from loving others as ourselves. In both, joy is not taken, but revealed through unity. A life of virtue and action. Spinoza calls it virtue, increasing your power to exist and act through reason. Jesus calls it bearing, fruit, doing good in the world through love. Both reject passivity, both demand action, both lead to a life that matters. So here's the invitation. Let's step out of the illusion of contradiction and walk into a deeper, integrated truth. Because when you unite the clarity of Spinoza with the compassion of Christ, you don't just think better, you live better. And perhaps you finally begin to live a life that is not only free, but full pot. No freedom from emotional slavery. Freedom from emotional slavery isn't about suppressing your emotions. It's about no longer being ruled by them. How many times have you said something in anger that you later regretted, or made a decision out of fear, only to realize you gave up something important because you panicked? We've all been there. You get that text that stings. You see that look in someone's eyes that triggers an old wound. Your heart starts racing. Your thoughts spiral, and before you know it, you're reacting, not responding, reacting from a place of pain, insecurity, or ego. This is the kind of slavery Spinoza was talking about. He called these emotional reactions passive affects, states where we are not authors of our own actions, but merely reactions to external forces. In his eyes, a person controlled by their emotions is not free, even if they appear successful or powerful, because they are not acting, they are being acted upon. And here's where Jesus and Spinoza meet, even if they speak different languages. Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." In his greatest moment of suffering, he didn't lash out. He didn't curse or resist. He responded with clarity and love, not emotional chaos. He modeled perfect emotional freedom, not because he didn't feel pain, but because he wasn't ruled by it. That's the deeper truth. You don't need to be cold or detached to be free. You just need to stop letting your emotions drag you like a leaf in the wind. Spinoza believed that when we understand the causes of our emotions, they lose their grip. And Jesus showed us that when we act from a place of love, even in suffering, we transcend the chaos. Now think about this. The mother who stays calm and present with her child having a tantrum in the middle of a grocery store, even though everyone's staring. The man who chooses not to lash out after being insulted at work, but instead breathes, understands the pain behind the words, and walks away with dignity. The young woman who resists the urge to compare herself online and instead reconnects with her own worth, built not on attention, but on truth. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of inner strength, because the strongest person in the room is not the loudest, the toughest, or the smartest. It's the one who can feel deeply and still choose how to respond. So let me ask you, what would your life look like if you were no longer a slave to your moods, your fears, your wounds? What kind of power would you unlock if you could stay rooted in your center, even when everything around you is shaking? This is not a fantasy. It's not for saints or sages alone. It's a skill, a practice, a path. And when you walk it with the clarity of reason and the power of love, you start to become someone who's unshakable. And this is just the beginning, because once you are no longer ruled by emotions, you're ready to live for something far greater than yourself. And that brings us to our second point. Seko, living for a greater whole. You are not an isolated flame. You are part of the fire. You are not a drop of water. You are the ocean, learning to become conscious of itself. There's something in us that aches when we feel alone. Not physically, alone. We can be surrounded by people and still feel it, but existentially alone. As if our life is separate. As if we're just here to survive, perform, accumulate, and disappear. Spinoza saw this illusion of separation as one of the roots of our suffering. He didn't believe in a God up in the clouds pulling strings. To him, God is nature, the infinite eternal substance of which everything is a part. You, me, the sky, the stars, the person you love, the stranger you avoid, all made of the same divine essence. And here's the astonishing thing. Jesus said the same thing, just through different language. He said, I and the Father are one. Whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me, not metaphorically, literally. He wasn't just talking about morality, he was talking about reality. You are not separate, you are not alone. And life begins to take on a new dimension the moment you start living as if this is true. You stop seeing people as obstacles or tools. You stop asking, what's in it for me? And you start asking, how can I serve this greater whole I belong to? And here's the paradox. When you shift that way, see, from ego to unity, you don't lose yourself. You actually find yourself. Let me give you some real examples. The man who dedicates years of his life caring for his aging mother, not out of guilt, but because he knows that her well-being is part of his own. The woman who stops chasing likes on social media and starts mentoring young girls in her community because she feels called to lift others, not just shine herself. The employee who refuses to cut corners, not because of company rules, but because he feels responsible for the integrity of something bigger than a paycheck. These people are not saints. They are awake. Spinoza would say their conatus, their inner force, is aligning with the whole of nature. Jesus would say they are becoming the light of the world. They're not sacrificing their lives, they are amplifying them. Because here's a truth most people never discover. When you live only for yourself, you shrink. But when you live for something greater, you expand beyond imagination. You begin to experience what Spinoza called blessedness, a joy that comes not from things or status, but from knowing your life is in harmony with the divine order of the universe. And you begin to taste what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven, not in some distant future, but here now within you. So the question becomes, are you living for your small self or for the whole of which you are a sacred part. Because when you choose the whole, you don't just survive, you resonate. And from that place of connection, of deep purpose, of sacred belonging, another transformation begins. The power of understanding and compassion. To understand is to love more deeply. To love is to understand what the mind alone cannot see. We live in a world that often pits reason against emotion, cold logic on one side, blind feeling on the other. But what if that's a false division? What if the most powerful force in the world is not reason or love, but reason guided by love, and love enlightened by understanding? That's what both Spinoza and Jesus were pointing to. Spinoza believed that when we begin to understand the true causes of things, including the causes of other people's behaviors, we no longer judge them out of ignorance. We no longer react with hatred, envy, or rage. We see them for what they are, beings acting from their own internal states, shaped by causes they often can't even see. Jesus knew this truth intimately. That's why, even as he was being nailed to a cross, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." This wasn't a passive display of weakness. It was a moment of divine clarity. He saw not just what people were doing, but why. He saw their blindness, their fear, their conditioning, and he responded with compassion rooted in understanding. That's not soft. That's the strongest, most transformative kind of power a human being can hold. And what about you? Think of someone who hurt you, someone who lied to you, betrayed your trust. Maybe they abandoned you or wounded you with words they can't take back. Now ask yourself, what pain were they carrying? What fear were they trying to hide? What chain of suffering were they unknowingly passing forward? Understanding doesn't mean excusing, and compassion doesn't mean allowing harm. But when you truly understand someone, you're no longer trapped in hate. You rise above it. You gain the power to choose something different. And that's not just philosophy, that's freedom. Let me show you what this looks like. A daughter who finally sees that her father's coldness wasn't personal. It was a mask for the emotional wounds he never learned to express. And instead of passing on that pattern, she chooses to raise her children with open affection. A man who realizes that his ex didn't break him out of cruelty, but out of fear. And instead of building walls, he rebuilds himself stronger and wiser, and loves again. A leader who listens to anger, not as an attack, but as a cry for dignity. And instead of reacting with control, he responds with presence, transforming conflict into healing. That's understanding and compassion in motion. That's reason and love dancing together. And it changes everything, because here's the secret. When you begin to understand people, really understand them, you stop hating them. And when you stop hating, you stop suffering. That's the vision Spinoza offered, a world where anger is replaced by clarity, where judgment gives way to comprehension, where emotions no longer chain us, but elevate us. And it's the path Jesus walked every single day. He looked into the eyes of the broken, the corrupt, the sick, and the lost. And he didn't just see what they were. He saw what they could become, and so can you. So the next time someone triggers you, stop. Ask yourself, what pain are they acting from? What wound are they protecting? What do they not yet see? Because when you understand, you become capable of something extraordinary. Compassion without weakness, boundaries without bitterness, love without fear. And from that space, from that rare union of truth and tenderness, you begin to live in a joy that no one can steal from you. And that brings us to something even more profound. For to joy through connection, not possession, you can have everything and feel empty, or have almost nothing, and feel joy flooding your chest like light. The difference? Connection, not possession. We've been sold a story that tells us happiness is something you chase, something you buy, build, or earn. More followers, more money, more attention, a better body, a bigger house, the perfect partner. But what happens when you finally get those things? The joy doesn't last. the emptiness returns, and so you chase. Again, Spinoza warned us, joy is not about what you own, but how deeply your soul connects with life itself. He called it increasing your power to act, not in terms of control, but in being fully alive in harmony with who you are and what truly matters. And Jesus, he showed us this truth, not through words, but through his life. He was a man with no home, no wealth, no possessions, and yet he overflowed with a kind of joy the world couldn't comprehend, a joy that came not from having, but from loving, not from controlling, but from trusting. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you felt real joy? I mean the kind that makes you stop and just breathe, the kind that makes your chest ache, not from sadness, but from beauty so deep it hurts. That moment when your child laughs and you forget the rest of the world. When a friend hugs you and you feel seen. When you're walking in nature and everything feels perfectly okay, even if nothing is perfect. That's joy through connection. Now contrast that with the person who finally gets the car they dreamed of, but now fears someone will scratch it. The one who wins admiration online, but can't sleep without refreshing their feed. The partner who clings tightly, not out of love, but from fear of loss, turning affection into control. Possession breeds anxiety, connection breeds presence. Spinoza believed that the more we understand the nature of things, the less we cling to illusions. He taught that trying to possess the world is like trying to own the wind. But when we connect with the wind, when we feel it move through us, we're finally alive in it. Jesus echoed the same message. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He wasn't condemning wealth. He was pointing us toward a deeper wealth, the kind that can't be stolen or rusted. So what does this mean for your life? It means you can stop measuring your worth by what you accumulate. You can stop exhausting yourself trying to hold on to what was never meant to be owned, people, praise, perfection. Instead, start asking, what am I truly connected to? Am I connected to my purpose or just my schedule? Am I connected to the people around me or only interacting through masks? Am I connected to my own soul or just performing a role I was taught to play? Because here's the truth. Connection is what brings things to life. Your possessions will fade, your status will pass, but your presence, your capacity to connect, that's eternal. And when you begin to live this way, when your joy is no longer dependent on outcomes or objects, you become unshakable because you're not chasing anymore. You're being, you're rooted, you're free, and that prepares you for perhaps the most essential shift of all. A life of virtue and action. The truth isn't just something you believe, it's something you become. And becoming it requires more than thought. It requires action. There comes a time when reflection isn't enough. You've read the books, you've listened to the wisdom, you've had those moments of clarity when everything makes sense for a brief, glowing instant. But then life happens, you get pulled back, old habits return, the world demands something of you, and your inner peace collapses like a fragile structure made of glass. Spinoza understood this. He taught that virtue is not about moral superiority, but about living in alignment with your true nature. Virtue to him was the power to act from understanding, not from impulse. It was the ability to live according to reason, even when the world pulls at your emotions like a storm. And Jesus, he didn't just sit beneath a tree meditating. He walked, healed, confronted injustice, wept with the broken flip tables when necessary, and moved through the world with a fire that was grounded in love. He said, "Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." He wasn't speaking of passive belief. He was calling us to embodied truth, to a life where the divine isn't just something we pray to, but something we live through. So what does that mean for you? It means all this knowledge, all this clarity, all this spiritual insight is meant to be lived. You say you want peace? Then stop fueling conflict. You say you want freedom? Then act with integrity even when it costs you. You say you want love? Then serve, not when it's convenient, but when it's needed most. Because every act of virtue is a choice to embody the eternal, even in the temporary chaos of this world. Let me give you something real. The young man who feels rage burning in his chest, but chooses to pause, breathe, and respond with calm. That is virtue. The woman who feels the pull to numb her pain with distractions, but instead sits in silence and faces it. That is courage. The employee who could take credit for something he didn't do, but chooses honesty over ego. That is alignment. The person who shows up for a friend, even when they're exhausted, even when it's not acknowledged. That is divine love in action. Because here's the truth, the life you long for will never come through thought alone. It arrives when thought becomes embodied courage, when knowledge becomes movement, when wisdom becomes service. Spinoza would say that this is what increases your power to exist, your ability to act freely, rationally with strength. Jesus would say this is bearing fruit, being not just a hearer of the word, but a doer of it. And the irony? It's through action that clarity deepens. It's through stepping into virtue, even before you feel ready, that the soul matures. So don't wait for the perfect conditions. Don't wait until you feel like doing the right thing. Don't wait until you've eliminated all fear or doubt. Act anyway, love anyway, serve anyway, speak truth anyway. Because this is the final alchemy. When you begin to live a life of virtue, not as performance, but as alignment, you discover something astonishing. You don't need to be perfect to be powerful. You just need to be real and relentlessly faithful to what you know is good. That's how a soul becomes indestructible, and that is the beginning of everything. You've just walked through a path where reason met compassion, where philosophy met faith, and where two seemingly distant voices, Spinoza and Jesus, spoke together to the deepest part of your being. And if something stirred inside you, if some truth echoed even quietly, then this isn't just another video. This is a moment where you can choose not to return to sleep, not to scroll past and forget, not to consume meaning without letting it transform you, because the world doesn't need more content. It needs more people who are awake, people who understand that living well is not about escaping suffering or avoiding discomfort, but about choosing again and again to act with truth, to live with virtue, to love with purpose. If that's the life you want, and if that's the world you want, then this message doesn't end here. So yes, if this spoke to you, leave a like, not for numbers, but to affirm that truth still matters. Subscribe, not just to a channel, but to a higher path. Share this with someone you love, because maybe today, your action could be the spark that brings light to someone lost in the dark. The algorithms don't change the world. You do. And if just one heart awakens because of this message, then everything we've said here will have mattered. Remember, a single act of virtue, a single moment of clarity, a single choice to love can echo through eternity. Thank you for being here, not just with your eyes, but with your soul. We'll meet again on the next step of the way.